Soybeans know they've got to kick into the reproductive stages, at least the indeterminate soybeans that we deal with here in the northern part of the U.S.
Well, I was just thinking you were going to say it's a little easier to get the kids to bed at night when it's not light so long in the day.
I hate that. I have little kids at home, and it is about impossible when it's bright sunlight at 9 o'clock at night.
No, really, it's bedtime. It's bedtime, kids. Well, okay, let's get back to soybeans. Now, with soybeans, once we start flowering with our varieties in the northern part of the United States, that means you've got to be really cautious with a lot of things, with bugs, with the weed control that you're spraying out there, and also you're more susceptible to getting disease into your soybeans once the reproductive stages have started.
Okay, well, you got a lot of stuff there. Let's start first on that disease issue. Now, leaf diseases can happen anytime throughout the life cycle of a soybean plant. But where Darren's really talking here with diseases entering in, we have white mold issues in the northern part of the United States, Sclerotinia white mold. And where Sclerotinia white mold commonly enters into the plant is after the flowers start to die off, it will enter in right at that point. It's basically an infection point, and that's where we see all kinds of issues late in the season. So you don't have to worry about white mold prior to June 21st, but after that point, once we start flowering and the flowers start to die off, and just a few days after they have flowered, then we've got issues.
Well, another thing, Brian, it's not just a white mold issue. Once you get into the reproductive stages of soybeans or just about any crop, that's when that crop is most susceptible to a lot of the diseases. And yes, they may be diseases that show up on the leaf, but the whole point of mine I'm trying to make is that soybeans are just a little bit weaker because they're putting all that energy into the flowering, into producing seeds and pods and all those things. And we see a lot of diseases show up real late in the season.
Okay, so they are trying to put all this energy into flowering and the pods and everything. So we don't want to make that plant expend its energy on metabolizing herbicides. So our point here is try to use any harsh herbicides early on in the season. There are some products even that are labeled where you have to spray them on soybeans prior to the soybean flowering. Now, some products that may be labeled to spray later on in the year, like Cobra, for example, I might for sure want to spray that before the soybean flowers because I know we're going to drop some leaves. I know it's going to be a little hard on the plant. Probably not going to hurt yield either way, but I'm concerned about it because if we get bad conditions, let's say it gets a little dry or something, the plant might not recover very well, and we might cause a lot of yield damage if we're spraying during flowering.
Now, some people that are listening to the show today say, well, wait a minute, I've got Liberty Link soybeans and I'm going to spray Liberty, or I have Roundup Ready soybeans and all I'm going to spray is Roundup. Is that still going to put stress on my beans?
It's going to put a slight amount of stress on. Am I that worried about it? No. But if possible, I'd like to get all my spraying done prior to the time the beans start flowering.
Well, when we think about flowering time, there's a lot of things that happen. And in our part of the world, this is also the time we start thinking about soybean aphids. Our plants seem to get to that stage where there's enough heat, enough humidity, it's good conditions for those aphids, and also they've got a great crop like soybeans to feed on.
Yeah, so I just said we want our spraying done by the time the beans start flowering. That's with herbicide. After flowering, we might consider spraying fungicide, insecticide, and even foliar fertilizer. Last year we had some good results spraying foliar fertilizer at about that R3 or first pod stage. We also are typically at that time spraying fungicide and insecticide, and we almost always get a response there too. So these are all things that you do want to consider spraying late in the season.
Now here's one other thing, Brad, that we haven't talked about yet. Plant tissue analysis. In a broadleaf crop like soybeans that really don't start showing any nutrient deficiencies till we get late in the season, once they're trying to fill pods and pushing all this energy into their seed, that's the time where we want to watch really closely to see what types of nutrients we need to bolster in our fertility program for next year.
Yeah, so that's the reason why you might consider foliar feeding or even side dressing soybeans. It doesn't do you much good to do that real early in the season because soybeans don't need a lot of nutrients early in the season. They take their big nutrient load late in the year. That's when a lot of yield is determined.
Now, if you're in the South, you're saying, wow, what are you guys talking about? You know, our plants are still growing up. They haven't even started flowering yet, and that's right. In the southern part of the United States, plants will grow all of their growth first, then they'll start flowering. We just don't have that in the north. Now our beans may be really short. If you got your beans planted late, or if you're in a replant situation, you say, my beans are only 6 inches tall. I don't really need to pay attention to this. Yes, you do. Your flowering may be delayed slightly. Maybe it's going to come a week later than your fields that you planted earlier, but it's still going to be pretty close around this time where the day length starts to get shorter. So do be cautious. Even if your beans are small, if they start flowering, start caring for them like they're very delicate, and it will pay off for you in the end.
Well, one of the things that's very important if you are caring for your soybeans is controlling our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?